Okay, we'll have our next speaker now. So now we have Jamie Cudden, who is the Smart City Programme Manager with Dublin City Council. Jamie leads the development and implementation of Dublin City Council's Smart City strategy, and he's leading the rollout of a Smart Dublin. So he's going to talk to us about that now.
That's great. Thanks for that, Sarah Jane. I remember when you first asked me to talk at Lone, said it'd be like 20-minute presentation, but I didn't know I was going to be in a pub and a barbecue and having beers and and no slides. Well, I kind of cheated a little bit, have a few prompts there, but thanks very much for the invite, and it's fantastic to be here today. And I just think I get very excited about all this technology and what the potential is for our cities and for people, and how we can really transform how we do things. And when I look at some of the trends, and we talked about some of them today, I just think about how connected Irish people are. I think it's about 90% of Irish people have mobile phones, smartphones. Largest users per capita of mobile internet. We just go crazy on social media, and we're just consuming tons of data. I mean, sometimes I wonder why we even call it a phone anymore. We consume so much data. And then if you think about from a consumer perspective, we've absolutely embraced, I guess, the collaborative economy, the sharing economy. We're booking our taxis using Uber, Halo, booking accommodation using Airbnb, consuming music using Spotify, and watching videos using Netflix. So I guess from the consumer perspective, we've absolutely got this, we've embraced it. And the question I ask is what are our cities and governments doing? And I think, unfortunately, we're a little bit behind the times, and it's about time we caught up a bit. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this today in terms of what we're trying to do in Dublin and how we're trying to address this. But we've heard a lot about the big trends of cloud, mobile, big data, 3D printing. We've heard about the prices of 3D printers. Think about wearables. I mean, how many of us here today have some type of fitness device? I'd say a lot of people. You're all tech savvy. But also things like augmented reality, virtual reality, machine learning. It's all happening now, and it's just really exciting because the cost to entry are so low. And you saw my thunder. I usually talk about low cost supercomputing. Raspberry Pi boards, $5. I joke that the computer from a Raspberry Pi is more powerful than the ones we use in the city council, but that doesn't go down too well. And we hear Arduino, this little tiny thing, $3. There's chips for $9, and the capability of these is just fantastic. So, I kind of talk about what happens when we start connecting these things, pulling these things out around our cities, connecting infrastructure, the roads, the vehicles, the cyclists, the bikes, the people, and start pushing all that data back up to the cloud. That's a truly smart city. That's the vision, the textbook vision, and I guess that's what we're being sold by a lot of the big tech companies. And you hear Cisco, of course, 50 billion connected devices. There's lots of different figures, but there's going to be a hell of a lot of connected things by 2020. The opportunity for cities are quite immense. I think we're on the verge of something massive. Internet of Things, we're only at the start of that journey, and it's going to transform how we do things, how we work, healthcare, and has a huge opportunity to change standards of living in countries and cities. And I think it's a very exciting time to be in that space. I think what we've heard just in the last presentation is it's not the big tech companies that are innovating the most. It's actually small startups. It's people who are just taking all these things and putting them together and creating new innovative devices and products. And Gartner talk about how half of all new IoT companies are actually startups less than 3 years old. So I guess from a city and a government perspective, how do we tap into that innovation and create opportunities for these companies to co-innovate and solve problems in our cities? I think there's some interesting stats. Just you can see some of the big tech giants of the last 10 years have fallen off the Fortune 500. I think it's about half of all companies have been replaced by new digital companies, and that's just shows you the scale of the actual transformation. When it comes to smart cities, the digitization of our cities, it's happening fast, but not fast enough. We hear figures like the $1.5 trillion opportunity, depending what source. They're all obviously big figures, but they're all different figures. But it's not really translating into that value. No one's making money out of smart cities, and smart cities aren't being delivered across the world. There's no one really excelling in this space yet. So we're a very early stage of all this development, and I'm going to talk about a little bit why is it taking so long. And I think the initial drive in Dublin, we saw IBM come in with their Smarter Cities Lab in 2009, 2010, and had this big vision for cities around the world. It'd be IBM Smart City, and their tech would solve all the problems of these big cities. And that didn't happen, and they changed the name of their Smart City unit to Cognitive Computing, and realized that cities are very complex places. I work in one, it's a complex place. Governments are difficult to work with. And I think what we really are starting to see now is more of a collaboration model in terms of cities, industry, researchers working together to figure out how to make this work. And city leaders are stepping up. From a Dublin perspective, we're quite lucky that our chief executive is very supportive of this and gets this. And what he's done the last couple of years is set up a core function within the City Council, set up a capital budget to support smart city collaborations, $1.5 million, which isn't big, but it's enough to get stuff done, and created a team and a resource. And the challenge with smart cities is that we have silos all across our cities. So the waste management teams don't speak to the lighting teams, and it's everyone doing their own thing, and systems getting duplicated, and it's a really complicated place to work. So we need to try and work across those. What did I say? I haven't said anything bad about 5G yet. That's coming next. So in Dublin, we've also not only looked at how we can transform the City Council, but we've also looked at how we can work across the 4 Dublin local authorities. Because the problems we face in cities, flooding, congestion, they don't stop at the boundaries. So we need to figure out models how we can work across some of these boundaries. So we launched Smart Dublin about a year ago, built out a nice brand, and created a new governance approach across the 4 local authorities. We think there's a big opportunity to promote local economic development, support startups, embed the activities of companies like Ericsson within Ireland, within our cities, to do more with less. We're under huge pressures in terms of finance, austerity, but also how we use this technology to actually transform people's lives and to engage better with our citizens. So there's some of the key drivers. And I guess, if you look at some of the successes that we've had in Dublin and probably in cities across Ireland, from a transport perspective, we've rolled out real-time passenger information. I don't know if you get much of that around here, but Dublin Bus have these real-time displays. We've opened up our traffic API that Google now can feed it to your search. We've created new dashboards where you can interact and engage with city data. We've opened up open data portals like DubLinked. We've put out Internet of Things, noise monitor networks, environmental sensors, etc. So there's a lot of interesting stuff happening when it comes to smart, but the question now is how do we scale that up? How do we really deliver impact, but at the same time make sure that we're engaging with citizens, that they know why we're doing this and it actually benefits them on a daily basis. So I guess what we find working with a lot of tech companies, and no criticism of Ericsson or any others, is that it's a very technology-led approach, and the issue is that we need to find actually what the challenges are that we're trying to solve, and then technology is an enabler to solve these challenges. And what we've done across the 4 local authorities is work with the planners, the engineers, the architects, the people with the real problems, and actually run workshops and engage with them and figure out actually these are potential collaborations and projects that we can deliver in our city to solve real problems. What do you think the problems are? Things like congestion. Congestion is a big problem in Dublin. How do we move towards a more sustainable transport model, get more people on their bikes, get people out of the car? That's a contentious one. How do we address extreme weather events, flash flooding? These 1 in 50-year events are happening every 1 in 5 years now. How do we respond more effectively? How do we better monitor the environment, address things like noise? Air quality is a big issue as well with diesel engines. And how do we address energy? How do we reduce the dependency on energy and reduce our usage and make sure we hit our targets? So So there's actually really interesting challenges, and all cities around the world have these challenges. So our view is if you can crack this challenge in Dublin or in an Irish city, you're creating a product or a service that you can scale up globally. So why can Dublin not be the place, I say Dublin, but anywhere in Ireland could not be the place to do this? And we're conscious that within the city, 5,500 staff, we don't have the right expertise. We haven't recruited a very old workforce, average age about 40. I think that's old now. But we're building out a collaboration model. And I just think like Ireland, but think about Dublin, like we have 9 out of 10 of the top 10 global tech companies on our doorstep. We have world-leading research centres. We've got amazing tech companies. These guys are innovating the hell out of all this tech, and we've got tons of problems to solve. So for us, it's about how do you pull all this together and create a collaboration model to innovate on our doorstep. And you know, when I hear what really, I suppose annoys me a lot is when I hear all these tech companies and they're going off to all these places around the world to pilot and test bed. I'm like, why are we not doing it on our doorstep? So our aim in Dublin is to pick different districts that we can innovate and work with companies. So that instead of going out to Korea or going to the US, they're doing this stuff. This real innovation is happening on our doorstep. Also, we're trying to build better cities together. No one city's cracked this. So we very much are involved in a lot of international alliances, and you find that cities are struggling. They haven't figured it out. They're finding it tough in terms of understanding the technology. So we can learn a lot from each other by collaborating. And our big selling point is Dublin as a test bed. I mean, Ireland as a test bed. We're not too big, we're not too small. This is where we should be doing this. And a fundamental building block to all this is connectivity. And you know, we heard a lot about that at the start. But you know, the more you get into this space, the more you realize without the right connectivity, you're not going to be able to deliver on the new use cases and the new business models. So a lot of our test bedding actually is looking at connectivity. In fact, we get quite excited about, you know, I don't know if I should say this in front of Ericsson, we get quite excited about low power wide area networks, Sigfox, LoRa. I know like the Vodafone guys cry when I talk about this, but NB-IoT, we're hoping to turn on NB-IoT in the Docklands. And we're very excited because environmental monitoring, low packets of data, high bandwidth, high coverage, low bandwidth, that works for a lot of environmental sensing use cases that we have in the city. And the business model is actually transformed with low cost sensors. So really nice examples looking at low cost flood monitoring, environmental monitoring that we're deploying, working with Connect Research Centre in Dublin and working with other partners to actually see how we can scale up a lot of these deployments. So I guess what we're also dreaming of is ubiquitous connectivity at all speeds that we want, all time, anywhere. So that's kind of the dream, but we feel like that's going to take a while to get there. And why do we think it's going to take a while to get there? It's because, you know, this idea of this utopia connecting everything in our cities, you know, there's a big reality that if you want to put, you know, small cells everywhere, you know, and I just think, you know, a lot of the tech companies we talk to, like they build out this business model, like, oh, this is going to be the next big thing. And then you bring them out into the city and you say, where are we going to put this stuff? And they say, well, just put it on the lamppost there. And we're like, well, you have to close that street, you have to get a permit, and we can't tap into the power because we have to pay a license and there's issues with regulation. And then they're like, oh, really? And then you talk to cities, all cities around the world have these issues. So, you know, we're going to really struggle deploying 5G in cities until we solve a lot of these problems with assets and regulation. And we're working on this with Cisco, working with Connect, and looking at picking different areas in the city to figure out how we can overcome this problem. As far as we can see, no cities in the world have really, you know, cracked this. And it's actually going to be the one big area that we need to sort out. You need access to power, you need access to backhaul, and you need access to things at height to deliver these networks. Without that, you know, you're never going to have this truly connected smart city. So where are we doing this? We're focusing on the Docklands. I don't know if people know the Docklands. They call it Silicon Docks. It's where all the hive of activity, Google, 5,000 employees, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Airbnb, they're all there. And it's just a booming, thriving district with $3 billion worth of development at the moment. There's about 60 cranes around the Docklands now. It's one of the biggest development projects in Europe, probably one of the biggest development projects in the world. We think this is the place to bring together that ecosystem. We put it in dark fiber. We're looking at how we could create that as a 5G test bed. We're experimenting with narrowband and other things and creating this connectivity test bed where we can work with the startups, we can give them the use cases and they can test and actually deliver solutions and services working with us in Dublin. So we're quite excited about it. We're bringing together all the big tech companies. It's actually convened by Google. You know, can you imagine, you know, working with Google normally so closed. But I think the beauty about the companies that are based in Ireland and in Dublin is that they actually want to make the Ireland and Dublin as attractive as they can, because they want to stay here and they want to move up the value chain and innovate the hell and get the right jobs and make sure that this is the right location to do all these things. So we're really trying to support that in Dublin. That's our big aim. And recently we put a bid in for, I don't know if you've ever heard of it, Lighthouse, Horizon 2020. I mean, it can kill you, these type of bids, if anyone in the room has been involved. But we led a bid on Lighthouse looking at energy innovation, looking at e-mobility, looking at integrated IT infrastructures. And what we found is actually when the city steps up and says, we've got this test bed, we've got this opportunity, we ended up working with all the developers, the energy companies, the car companies, because we were creating the opportunity to connect all these people, because we're the only legitimate person who can actually bring these people together in one place. And I used to find energy quite boring. Actually, it's very interesting after your presentation. But when you start working with the likes of IBM and Accenture, and you look at like cognitive buildings and how buildings can learn and teach themselves in terms of optimizing their performance using dense networks of sensors, and how they can hedge energy bills, you start realizing, wow, the technology is there. It's figuring out the use case, the business model is the next stage. But we're very excited about being at that cutting edge, using the innovation funds. In fact, actually, IDA, Enterprise Ireland, there's tons of innovation funds. There's SFI funds that we tap into. It's actually just bringing the right people together and having the right mindset and having the support of the city to do it. From a city service perspective and some of the infrastructure that we're looking at, two of the big projects that we're rolling out at the moment are smart bins. Whoever would have thought a bin could have been smart? In fact, I don't look at bins the same way anymore since we started this project. So we put a notice out to the market and said, listen, we're looking to experiment with smart bins. And we actually, I don't know if everyone's seen the big belly bin. It's got like a solar panel on the top. It's got sensors, it's cellular connectivity, but it actually tells you what the level of waste is in the bin, but it's got a compactor that compresses the level of waste up to 8 times. We rolled out 70 of those bins in the city centre and had 90% efficiencies. So instead of like, say, 1,000 bags being emptied over a week or so, it was like 100 bags. And then you start thinking, wow, that's actually transformative in terms of efficiencies. But not only that, we're starting to put sensors in these bins that can count the number of people that walk by. You can put environmental sensors on the bin. But then you can actually put advertising on the bin. So all of a sudden the business model is completely changed. And I look at a bin, it's not a bin anymore. It's actually a sensor that's at the heart of a smart city. So in fact, actually, we're starting to rethink about assets and how we work and how we break down silos in cities. And street lighting is another classic example. So our street lighting team, 45,000 lights in the city, €6 million energy bill. What do they want to do? They want to put a new light in, an LED light, and get the energy savings. But why would you miss the opportunity not to put in an IoT network, put some fibre in some of those poles, put in an infrastructure that you can put some cells inside, and actually create a future-proof asset that you can actually deploy other services on top. So we're engaging with the market at the moment and looking to put a procurement competitive dialogue package out towards the end of the year to look at how this can be the backbone of our smart city in Dublin. So it's really exciting times, but you need to rethink things. And I can tell you one thing, the street lighting guys hate me. They think this is the worst idea ever. But that's what you're up against, but the potential is just so big. And if we miss these potentials in Ireland and Dublin, we're just going to be wiped out by other cities around the world, and we're not going to be competitive, and they're not the cities. We're not going to be one of the cities that people want to live in and actually want to work in, etc. Another good use case is Dublin bikes. Has anyone tried a Dublin bike? One of the most successful bike schemes in the world. I think each bike is recycled about 11 times per day. But it's a very rigid system where you have to put in a very expensive piece of infrastructure, and it's very difficult to see how we're going to scale it up in terms of what we have at the moment. Now what we're seeing in Chinese cities, I don't know if anyone's seen the like a Mobike or a Blue Go-Go, where the bike actually has the technology built into it. And it's a Bluetooth lock, and it's got a GPS and a cellular, and you can see where the bikes are. You can leave the bikes anywhere, and you can lock them, and they're doing mad business in China, billion-dollar industries, and they're trying to scale this now in cities across the world. We've had some of these companies come into our management team and say we're going to bring a couple of thousand of these and flood them around Dublin. Our management team were like, oh my God, how are we going to manage this? Bikes dumped everywhere, thrown into the river, and we don't control it. So, but the technology is moving so fast that now you're able to deploy stuff that you don't even require the likes of a big, huge organisation like the city. So it's it's starting to really disrupt. We see the government's going to be disrupted, cities are going to be disrupted, and cities just aren't ready for this. There's a certain mindset that we have to control everything. So it's really exciting times, but like big challenges in terms of how we kind of address this. Some of just a snippet of some of the other interesting projects that we have, looking at flood monitoring. We talked about a network of different sensors, low-cost sensors, high-cost sensors, transmitting data to the right people at the right time, helping you to make decisions. That's kind of the type of stuff that we're focusing on, using low-power networks, looking at experimenting with connectivity, etc. Crow Park is a really exciting project, a smart stadium project, Intel, Microsoft, and looking at how can you create a test bed within a confined environment, looking at video analytics, how can you do processing on the edge to look at crowd behaviour, how can you optimise the performance of the pitch, the growth of the grass, cut costs in terms of maintenance. And actually a really exciting one is they put some sound monitors around the stadium so they can see what the loudest cheer, what team is getting the best noise during the match. And it's just really simple things, but fun things. You can start gamifying some of this stuff. So I think there's really interesting things happening. They're happening here in Ireland, they're happening in Dublin, and I think it's exciting times. We need to scale this up. But one of the big issues that we have in cities and in government is that it's really difficult to buy these solutions. I don't know if anyone's involved in procurement here. Probably not. Luckily, it's the worst thing ever. So if you think about it, so you're talking to me today about all these amazing opportunities, and I'm kind of agreeing they're amazing. But think about your engineers and your planners, and they haven't looked outside the city council for 20 years, and they're looking to buy something. And what do? They have a chat internally and they put together what they think the solution is. They put it out to the market. It's completely the wrong thing that they're looking for, and they end up buying something big, clunky, work with the usual suspects, and it never seems to deliver at the cutting edge of innovation. So cities and government need to really rethink how they procure and how they engage with the market and understand what the opportunities are, and do things like pilots and test beds that influence the spec for procurement, but also put challenges out to the market. So some of the areas that we're looking at in Dublin is procurement by challenge. So this idea, and we're working with Enterprise Ireland on this, where where we think the market hasn't really delivered something. So for example, cycling. Do many people cycle here? Cycling popular? Does anyone ever have their bike stolen? Yeah. So it's always the same. But in Dublin, I think about 10,000 bikes are stolen a year, and we're like, there has to be a solution for that. A low-cost sensor running off a low-power network that's just a fraction, to rent for a service or whatever. So we put a challenge out to the market. In fact, actually, we're trying to scale up cycling in Dublin. We want to address security, theft, and we want to understand better where people are cycling. We put 150k into an innovation fund to deliver innovation contracts, and we got 96 expressions of interest, 23 applications, and we actually gave contracts to 5 companies for €12,500 just to develop a feasibility. It was like your idea, like here's 12,500 to just develop that a bit more. And we're just like, what we got was amazing actually. We got like people experimenting with LoRa, Sigfox embedded into the bike, and now they're looking at MVIoT because it's not out yet, but it will be. And also smart lights, where the light actually has sensors in it that, the closer a vehicle is to it, the light flashes more vigorously, but it also collects really quality data in terms of the road surface and feeds it back to the phone. To a smart bell, where you click it, it sends a bit of information back to your phone. So we gave 5 companies contracts, 12,500 to test this with us. And then we were so happy with some of the results that we then gave them 25,000 to pilot some of this stuff in the city. And on the back of this, one company's got high potential startup funding, another company's got some contracts in the US. So it just shows you if the city seeds some of these ideas and gives companies opportunities, the results can be absolutely fantastic. The value that we got in terms of understanding the latest thinking and connectivity was actually invaluable. You wouldn't have got it from any consultancy. So what we're doing, we're scaling up this program. We just launched €600,000 worth of innovation contracts last week, looking at the big problem. I don't know if it's a problem here, illegal dumping. People just throwing their waste everywhere. And it's a big issue in Dublin, costing us about 2 million a year. We think there's smarter ways using video analytics, maybe drones, other things to address this problem. So we've put that challenge out to the market. Another really exciting one, and I know Ericsson have done some work on this, is goalie monitoring. in high-risk flooding areas. So how can you predict, where the problems are going to be? How can you deploy low-cost sensors there? How can you use machine learning and predictive analytics to get the right people to the right places at the right time to minimise risk? And wayfinding, understanding how people can get around the city easier and better. So we're quite excited about where we're going with smart cities. We think there's a big opportunity. But in saying that, we think it's not going to scale up until we address some of our policies and we get central government and other people realising that this has to happen, it has to happen here, and we have to make it happen. And when I read a lot of policies, transport policies, planning policies, no one's talking about, they're talking about 2030, 2040, no one's talking about technology. And that's going to drive a lot of this. I think we're poised to experience more digital progress in the next 10 years than in the last 50. And if you think about the iPhone's only 10 years old. So think about what the technology is going to be like and think about when 5G comes and all these use cases. And is government ready? And there'll be negatives, there'll be positives, but we're not even talking about that at the moment. And I kind of fear that we'll lose that opportunity in Ireland and in Dublin unless we do something. The future of work, industrial, IoT, it's going to transform so much. There'll be job losses, there'll be job creation. Are we got the right skills? So just to sum up, I think massive opportunity. Cities are stepping up. I'm delighted that Dublin is at the forefront of that. Why couldn't that alone be a test bed of note? You've got amazing expertise and know-how. Why aren't you engaging with I don't know who the local authority is, Westmeath, is it? They might get they might find it a while to get the hang of it, but collaboration is the key to this, and we're doing a lot of stuff experimenting and sharing this knowledge across cities across Ireland. I think just to sum up, it's not so much about the tech, it's about people, culture and change, and I think that's the big issue that we need to address in Ireland and Dublin. Thanks very much.
Hi, thanks very much for the very interesting talk. So when I think of smart cities, and you mentioned Dublin, bigger cities, and I think of scale a lot. But at the very end of your talk, you mentioned about Athlone there, or equivalent, small cities, big towns kind of thing. What are the kind of unique requirements from your experience, do you think, of these kind of smaller areas as opposed to dealing with major, large cities, congestion, big problems like this, which don't exist so much in smaller cities?
Yeah, well, I think, firstly, you don't have to deal with as much bureaucracy. So you should be able to get things done quicker in a smaller district. Now, I'm just back from an event in Switzerland with Swisscom, and they've done some amazing stuff with a small town called Pully with 18,000 residents, innovating how they use mobile data to understand, how people move around the city and understand flows and dynamics of flows and influence transport planning and infrastructure investment. I just think, the bigger the city gets, the more challenging it gets because of, the complexity of the city. So I think you mightn't have the same level of challenges, but I think everywhere has enough challenges to do interesting things that can be, of note, So I think, just because you're small, but, the Crow Park testbed is a great example. If you're in a more confined, less stakeholders, and you can make decisions quickly, you can actually get a lot of stuff done. That's why we've picked Docklands as a model and maybe as a template that we can use for other areas in the city.
A question then is, you mentioned Dublin has 9 of the 10 tech companies. What are we doing to stimulate or provoke engagement and involvement with these type of companies to have some local responsibilities of innovation and engagement with the city? We entice them with tax incentives, but what about progressive, aggressive tactics to make us smart cities and enable our bureaucracy to grow? We have comically, you mentioned 4 times bureaucracy is a big disabler to your speech. That technology is broad. Bureaucracy makes it very narrow. And we have many enablers through bureaucracy if we're smart. So you can't have a smart city without that.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And I think the big challenge, is that people just aren't aware of what's happening in the tech. There needs to be a whole awareness building program for key decision makers and, what the opportunity is. Because if you don't know what you're missing. In terms of what things, are in place to embed maybe some of the stuff, some of these companies within, I suppose, the innovation ecosystem, I think there's, amazing stuff happening in Ireland. You've probably heard of these research centres and spokes, SFI, Science Foundation Ireland. You get Insight, Lero, Connect. We have, projects with each of those centres where we put in an investment that gets doubled up, and then we get some resources to do stuff that I could never do within the city environment because we can't recruit and we can't get the right skill sets in. We also have things like innovation partnerships. There's a whole raft of, I think, opportunities to fund good ideas and innovative projects within the Irish context. I think it needs to have the willingness, or someone like a chief executive or someone at that level who wants to do it. And I always look at cities that don't have that high-level buy-in or have their mayor, and I think how difficult it must be, because even when you're working with your chief executive, there's a whole lot of opposition to this because people just don't like change. But the other thing that's a challenge is that some of the change in terms of efficiencies threatens people's jobs. So that's a challenge in itself, how you manage that.
There was a question asked on the last talk, about systems and how they integrate. And you've just mentioned yourself that you didn't know what was happening in Westmeath, or is it Westmeath County Council? Is there a space that we should be actually looking at this across the whole of Ireland? So if a tourist arrives and they want to get on a Dublin bike, or they want to get on a Galway bike, or they want to get on a Westmeath bike, or if, this way, should we be more looking at it as a joined up thinking between county councils or local government and having that sort of view?
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously that's where you want to be. And we have set up a national Irish Smart City Forum with the main Irish cities and Northern Irish cities to kind of take that approach, share best practice. But I think, my feeling is that, a lot of the local authorities, they just don't have the bandwidth to even think about this. And I think that's where the challenge lies. But certainly there's great forums to share some of the best practice. But we need to certainly be doing more. I guess what we're trying to do in Dublin City Council is just go for it and just say, let's we'd be all years waiting for everyone to get on board. Let's just do it and then lead by example.
That's it. Thanks very much.
That's great. Thanks.